So let's step into the world of oil. Nigeria still depends heavily on crude oil to support its budget, and reforms in the oil and gas sector that can squeeze out extra revenues for the nation are much needed. So the long-awaited Petroleum Industry Bill is one of such reform. Now, the Senate, and the House of Reps will be conducting public hearings on the PIB between the 25th and the 28th of this month. The general expectation is that the bill will be enacted into law in the first quarter of this year. But will that become a reality, and what will be the impact on the sector? Joining us to discuss further on this is Wale Ajayi, a partner, tax, regulatory, and people services at KPMG. Good morning. It's good to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Thank you. Do you think we will get this version of the Petroleum Industry Bill 2020 into law? That's the last one sent to the National Assembly by Mr. President. Do you think end of this quarter looks realizable?
Yes, I think so. I think if there are two words to use, I probably would say cautious optimism because of what we've seen in the past. But I'm convinced, given the traction that we've seen in the National Assembly, that before March, we should have the Petroleum Industry Bill.
But do you think it will help attract the desired investment into the Nigeria's oil and gas industry? Do you think this bill is all we need? Is it that silver bullet?
It's difficult to say that it's the silver bullet that we need, but I think it's a step in the right direction. What I can say is that at least it will help to clarify the uncertainty surrounding the fiscal and regulatory regime in the oil and gas industry. But then when you look at some of the provisions that are there, they're novel. And I think, at the end of the day, it's about, being competitive in the world stage. I mean, interestingly, one of the things that the National Assembly or the Minister of Finance did, when they were discussing the bill, was to look at how Nigeria, is competitive with the rest of some of the world physical systems. And it turned out that we were ranked 748. Out of about 757, world physical systems. So we need to be competitive. It's about cost. We need to bring our costs down. And those are some of the provisions that the PIB will try to do to make Nigeria oil and gas industry attractive to investors.
Do you think the benefits of the dual regulatory authority envisaged in the bill will outweigh the cost? Do you think we're setting more structures and the cost is going to get more? When we talk about the cost in the industry, where really are the sticky points?
I think one of the problems we've seen in the Nigerian oil and gas industry has always been the issue of cost. I mean, we've been talking about the need for us to be able to reduce the cost of production per barrel. I mean, when you consider the fact that in Saudi Arabia, the cost for production per barrel is just about $8. In Iran, it's about $9. In Iraq, it's about $11. And then when you come to Nigeria, I mean, you're looking at about $17, although some people still feel that may be in the 20s. And one of the biggest, of course, issues that you see is the bureaucracy and, of course, the issue of the vandalism, security cost. So what I looked at is, in terms of the dual structure or dual authority that the PIB has proposed, is that, yes, I know that it may add to the cost of administration. But when you look at the fact that our focus has always been on the extraction part of the industry, we've never focused on midstream. So that will go a long way. And the other issue, of course, is the fact that you don't want to have a super regulator. I mean, when you look at the financial services in Nigeria, there are two regulators. You have the CBN and you have the NICOM. And I think that is the same thing they're trying to replicate so that we can actually focus on the growth and development of the midstream sector. So I think, yes, cost is there. But in terms of the benefit, if it is well managed, then we should be able to get what we want.
But will the PIB promote and enhance the competitiveness of Nigeria's oil and gas fiscal regime? I look at some of the big investments going into Morocco, Egypt, and elsewhere, and I'm saying, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, we've waited for PIB for how many years? The first PIB was introduced in 2008. And of course, it created a lot of uncertainty. I mean, that's not really the cause of the lack of investment in the oil and gas industry. It has contributed to it, but the major reason really is because of the decline in oil prices. Yes, when you look at, let's even come home and look at Africa. I mean, people are taking bets on Namibia, on Botswana, and on Mozambique. And so we need to be competitive for us to be able to attract, the investment into Nigerian oil and gas industry. And I think when you look at some of the provisions that the PIB, has provided for, right? I mean, it should go a long way, to at least, align the fears of investors. But I know that, you are like Oliver Twist, you want more. But at least let's get the PIB passed, and then we can start talking about what we need to do to even make changes to the PIB.
So oil prices now north of $50 a barrel. You think it's a good time to bring the PIB on board?
Yes, I think so, especially when you consider the fact that there's so much uncertainty when it comes to demand for oil. I mean, one of the major drivers for the growth of the oil and gas industry is transportation, and we've seen that the havoc that COVID-19 has wreaked on the industry. And we've seen a lot of countries also, introducing lockdowns, right? And then, the general expectation is that oil and gas demand may be flat in the next 10 to 20 years. And we have aspiration to grow our reserves to 40, billion barrels and to be producing 4 million barrels of oil per day. And so this is the right time really to be able to bring in that investment or to bring in PIB so that people can make the investment. Because, at the end of the day, is what are we going to do with our oil in 20, 30 years' time? If demand for oil, just decline significantly. We've seen situation where the UK has said that, fossil-powered vehicles will be banned by 2030, and Norway has also followed suit. And this is what we're likely to see. So we really need to have something that will create certainty in the industry so that at least we can commence and increase our drilling program so that we can increase our reserves. Our reserves, have stood at 36, 37 billion barrels for a very long time. It is high time we move it to 40 billion, that we've been talking about.
We can't continue, we cannot end this conversation without talking about the reform of the NNPC. Wale Ajayi of KPMG, stand by. We'll be back with you in about 2 minutes. Yeah. And here we continue the conversation around the Petroleum Industry Bill with Wale Ajayi, who is a partner at Tax, Regulatory and People Services at KPMG. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate your time for sticking around with us. The NNPC is, when you talk about oil industry in Nigeria, whatever, the first thought in everybody's mind is the NNPC, the State Oil Corporation. So what are your thoughts about how we can transform or reform this very huge behemoth that sits on Nigeria's patrimony called crude oil?
NNPC has always been the biggest, one of the biggest challenges that we face in the oil and gas industry. And it's interesting that we've been talking about reforming the NNPC for a very long time. And I think with the provisions in the PIB, even though it's not really fully what we want, but I think at least we're taking a step in the right direction by commercializing NNPC in the first instance. But one of the things we still have is that it's still going to be a government-owned company for a while until the shares are transferred. And so I really don't see whether it's going to be profitable in the short time until we're able to really transform it to really being a company that is owned not by government, by investors, other investors. And I think that's one of the things that the government can do, to do that is to accelerate the process. As soon as the PIB is passed, the requirement is that within 6 months, NNPC Limited has to be incorporated. So hopefully we can get that incorporated. And I think, at the end of the day also is that there's still the issue of funding. Yes, even though it is incorporated as a company, it should be able to raise funds by itself. But I really don't know how far they can go. And that takes me to the issue of the JVs, the incorporated JVs. In the PIB, it is proposed to be voluntary between NNPC and the other partners. I think we need to get that done ASAP. Because when we see the like of Saudi Aramco or Petronas or Equinor in Norway, that is the dream that we have for NNPC. But, we've taken a step, just baby steps that we've taken with what we provided in the PIB, but we still have to go a long way to really transform NNPC to be, like Petronas or Saudi Aramco.
But do you think the NDDC, the Niger Delta Development Commission, will still be relevant if we put out the new PIB, given the proposed introduction of the Petroleum Host Community Fund?
I mean, that's the question everybody has been asking. You know, what's the continued relevance of the NEDC? I mean, every operator in the sector contributes 3% of their budgets, you know, to NEDC. And unfortunately for NEDC, they've been in the news in recent times for the wrong reasons, right? And then we then have what you have, the petroleum host community in the PIB, where oil companies are meant to contribute 2.5% of their OPEX in the preceding year, you know, to the petroleum host community. And so the question is, why do we still have to keep NEDC? And that's the question that, people are going to be asking at the public hearing. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's better, you know, left to the host community, Petroleum Host Community Fund, you know, to actually cater for the interest of the people in those communities and transform them to what they should be.
Interesting. I know it's going to be a very big fight at the hearing. NDDC is not going to go down without a big fight. Again, we all know the whole story around it and the whole interest around the NDDC. Yeah. But again, it has to be effective. It hasn't really been that, and I make bold to say that, and everyone can say. But there could still be a whole lot more to be done. Maybe it was just a very clever way by the executive branch to put that clause there, perhaps find a way to wrap up the NDDC if it hasn't been. But what about the petroleum mining leases to be converted, the underdeveloped acreages to develop through competitive bidding? Haven't we gone through this similar thing in the past? Is there anything new here on the block?
I agree with you. There's really nothing new in that provision. We still have the same provision in the Petroleum Act. I think the problem we've had in Nigeria is not really the law itself. It's the willpower to implement the laws to the letter. I mean, because currently there's a provision in the Petroleum Act that requires when companies are converting their petroleum prospecting lease to oil mining lease, you know, that 50% of it must be relinquished. Well, what did we do? Right? So, I mean, even though there's supposed to be a mandatory requirement or relinquishment for that, what we simply did is to say to them, look, you know what? You can actually apply to retain that 50%. All you need to do is to pay $500,000 and then pay your signature bonus that you paid when you initially got the lease. So really, the provision really doesn't mean anything to me. The question is, are we going to be able to implement it this time around? And if we can, then we'll just be back to where we are. Nothing will really will change.
Okay, I'm wanting to throw in this part into the conversation about the local content development. Will the new PIB strengthen that any further that we currently have in the country?
Well, it should, and we're also aware, of course, is that there are changes that have been made to the local content law, you know, to make it, you know, be broader, go beyond oil and gas to other sectors. So what the PIB will do, I mean, at the end of the day, is that when I look at the kind of requirements or provisions that have been provided to Nigerian companies, right, especially the marginal feed players, and I think, you know, at the end of the day, it should be able to strengthen the ability, you know, to be able to actually build capability in the industry and also, you know, and grow the assets that they may win. Because what's going to happen is that their current lease will just be transformed to petroleum mining lease. So it should strengthen the capacity of Nigerians, you know, to play an active role in the sector.
But will there be an end to discretionary allocation of oil blocks, as we've seen in years and decades, through extant law providing for competitive bidding? Will we be able to put a stop to this discretionary allocation by whoever sits in the office of the CEO and Commander-in-Chief?
You know, one of the problems that stopped the implementation or delayed the implementation of the PIB has always been the powers of the minister and the powers of the president, right? And one of the issues has always been the ability of the president to award, you know, to give discretionary blocks to people like we did in the early 90s, right? So we have a provision in the PIB that says, no, it has to be competitive. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's not so much as what the law says. It's what we do that really matters. I mean, there are provisions that are supposed to govern how things are supposed to be done and the process that you need to go through. So I wish I could say that we'll see an end to discretionary bidding, but I doubt if that is going to happen. I think that is probably still going to continue, you know, for a while.
Discretionary allocation. Yes.
Yeah.
So do you think we should involve the National Assembly or tell the Senate when it comes to matters of this nature moving forward? Should the Senate, National Assembly, put in a few clauses around that?
I I think the way it is like it's a sufficient provision really in the bill that discourages discretionary allocation. I think what needs to happen is that civil rights organizations, right, and journalists, people in the media really need to step up, because that is what needs to happen, and then raise issues when these things happen. Because we need to really comply.
But we don't know, Mr. Ajayi, we don't know when discretionary oil blocks are allocated. I'm sure I'll be sleeping somewhere. You also be in bed by the time these kind of deals are done. The only time you get to know is when perhaps there is a fight somewhere, quarrel, bit of problems, then you say, oh, that guy gets the... I'm not sure it's ever gazetted, by the way. So usually it's not gazetted. I'm not sure the National Assembly knows. So that's what I'm saying, perhaps it should be something we say, okay, if Mr. President or anyone sitting in the office of the Commander-in-Chief and the head of the government says we want to do this, then should be done, then pass it to the Senate and say, so that it becomes a public information, then we all get to know about it at the same time, then it could be read on the floor of the Senate, and then we can all contribute to that, not after the allocation has been done, oil has been lifted and all of that.
Unfortunately, that's the nature of discretionary allocation. It is only when it has been allocated you get to know about it, unfortunately. Well, I think it really doesn't matter. Even when we get to know after, we can still challenge the process. And this is where I still believe that media houses, civil societies really need to play a role in discouraging this. I mean, at least we can talk about it. And, at the end of the day, government may still be able to withdraw, whatever allocation that they've given, to those business owners.
I don't have a problem with the discretionary allocation, as long as it's done in good faith and in the best interest of the people and the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's all I stand for as a business journalist, and I raise my hand to that.
Yeah, the problem there is that it challenges best practices. It challenges governance issues. Who are you going to give it to?
I get that.
I mean,
that's a big question. Who are you giving it to? That's the question. Let's think about that for the next conversation we're going to have. Thank you so much, Wale Ajayi, a partner, tax and regulatory services at KPMG. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
It's good to have you here.
Okay, then.